Hey guys, thanks for clicking on my video. This is the Mr. Articulate Reads Books channel, where I upload videos to summarize sections of books that I am currently reading, mostly for my own benefit, to both crystallize the things that I've read so that the knowledge will stay with me and be usable for me in my life, and also to practice something that I practice on both this and my main channel, which is to speak on a subject in a way where I'm not just saying a long series of sentences that all fit the topic I'm talking about, but to actually have the content of those sentences be organized and marshaled so that I am aware as I'm speaking of where I'm going and what points that I'm going to make and what value each possible sentence that I might start saying would have to my bigger goals for the way that I'm covering the topic. So anyway, with all that out of the way, I have just read section 2 of part 2 of book 1 of Hume's Treatise of Human Nature. So heretofore in part 2 of book 1, Hume has been talking about space and time and how we should understand them. In the last section before this one, he establishes that neither space nor time are infinitely divisible, but that there are basic units, which he calls mathematical points, I believe, that are not susceptible of division, but are indivisible. So now in this section, he picks up where he left off, but he combines these new axioms of his with the stuff that he built up in part 1 of book 1 about impressions and ideas, and the fact that ideas are always copies of impressions, and that the only way we can have knowledge of anything are through impressions or through ideas, which again are copies of impressions. So he combines these two things first by looking at space. And he basically states that when it comes to space, the main perception that we as humans have is the perception of extension, that they're basically, to perceive space is to perceive that objects can have the quality of extension. So if we look at our desk, that's the example that Hume himself makes. If we look at our desk, we get from that the idea of extension, because we see that the desk has a certain length and a certain width. So how do we do that? It is through our visual impressions, and we see many points of brown wood, and it's the coordination, the arrangement of many individual points of brownness and woodenness all coexisting with each other in a organized way where they are all, as it were, shoulder to shoulder. That is how we get the idea of extension. And then the way we get an idea of time is, or let me just put a final point on what I was just saying. So basically, the way that extension, the idea of extension exists in our minds is through sensory impression. And he basically says that if you could never have impressions via your senses, it doesn't just have to be vision, it can also be touch. I think it could also be the other senses too, but he says just those two. So if you never could have sensory impressions of lots of these mathematical points existing in an orderly way simultaneously, you could never come to an idea of extension. So therefore, our idea of space and extension relies on our impressions, specifically of the sensory kind, because as he points out, the other type of impression that we can experience is an impression of reflection, which is always a reflection upon an idea, which derives from a sensation. And there's really no way that a impression of reflection, i.e. our feelings or our aversions or what have you, could ever give us the idea of space. So time now. The way that we gain our idea of time is always by noticing different impressions, be they impressions of objects or impressions of ideas being experienced by us, or impressions of reflection, whatever they be. It is noticing the way that they occur in a sequence that gives us an idea of time. And he tries to probe, is it possible, excuse me, got a cat somewhere in the house who's meowing. He tries to probe, could we ever derive an idea of time without referencing specific sequences of experience in the forms that I just said? Primary impressions, ideas, or impressions of reflection? And the answer to that is no. We can only gain an idea of time through an experience of time, or an impression of time. And an impression of time is only possible through noticing, here was an impression I had, and then I had an idea, and then I had an impression, and another impression, and then another idea, and then I saw another object, and so on. So basically, he nails down that time, just like space, is something that becomes an idea to us only via our impressions, and the idea could never be derived without the impression. Although I suppose that's really baked into things Hume said right from the very first section of Book 1, which is that an idea can never be derived without being a copy of an impression. So I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted by my cat meowing outside of my sleeping toddler's room. He likes to do that sometimes. So he establishes those things, and then the last thing he gets into in this section is he starts trying, he brings back his maxim that he established previously, that anything which is different can be differentiated, and what can be differentiated can be separated. But if a thing is not different, it can't be differentiated, and if it can't be differentiated, it can't be separated. And he's also bringing back in things he's worked on in terms of so he's previously established that there are no truly general abstract ideas, because if you look hard enough at any abstract idea, it actually does rely on a combination of potentially countless numbers of different impressions and ideas, but always in the end specific impressions or ideas. And he ends up basically saying that if you see, say, a purple flower, the purple flower can give you everything you need to know, or you need to have an impression of, in order to derive the idea of extension. Because the idea of extension, as abstract as it is, it's one of those times where we can take related impressions and assign them to a common word in order to harness the power of abstract thinking. But those abstract words still derive from things that are specific. So the purple flower can tell you everything you need to know, but it is inseparable from the purpleness. So we get the extension from a purple flower because we are seeing tons and tons and tons of those indivisible basic points that are arranged in a certain way. But those points must be purple, because if they didn't have color, then no number of those points arranged together in an orderly way could show us a flower, because we rely on purpleness. So there's that. And then for time, there was stuff at the end that I found really interesting, and I was reflecting on it before I started this video, and I felt like I was seeing something deeper about Hume's ideas, but I'm sad to say that I don't remember any of it now. But there are two main reasons I'm making this channel. One of them is that by verbalizing at length the things that I'm reading, I'm hoping it will let me retain what I read better and apply it to other ideas and other things that I read in the future, and so on. And then the other is I just want my mind to get stronger. So it definitely doesn't make me feel great that I read these sections of the treatise and then I go to make these videos and I don't remember parts, but that's okay. It's fine. And I'm doing these videos in part to get better at remembering this stuff. And you can't really remember what you don't understand. So I guess it's for these parts where my understanding is more incomplete, I remember it less. Whereas the parts that my understanding is more complete, I do remember it better. The earliest sections of part 1 of book 1, I definitely understood a lot better than, I think it was around section 5 of part 1, where it started to be deeper waters, and I'm getting things from each section, but I'm not getting all of it. Whereas when I did get all of it, I actually was able to pop on these videos and remember really well sequentially what happened. So that's important to remember. I think it's actually a pretty good insight. You can't remember what you don't understand. And boy, that probably applies for me to a lot of things in my life. So that's pretty cool. So thank you for sticking with me. If you have stuck with me this far, I will end, as I always do with these videos, by a little exercise I do. First, I state in just 1 or 2 sentences a main idea or argument from the section, oh my gosh, my cat, main section of that I've just read. So in this case, for that, I will say that space, the idea of space can exist in our minds through no way except sense impressions of objects with properties arranged in a certain way, and our sense of idea, excuse me, let me use precise language here. Our idea of time can exist in our mind in no way except with reference to the ordering of impressions of ideas in a sequential way. And then the second thing I do is give an example of this argument, and I will point back to the illustration of the desk for the space and the 5 notes played on a flute in succession for the time. So thanks so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I will be back soon enough with another summary of the next section of the treatise.